Namaste and welcome to another edition of the Bharat Varta Weekly. Thank you so much for choosing to skip the news and watch the weekly instead. I have your regular panel, Ashish Chandorkar and Srivatsa Subana, here to discuss the news and events of the week that was. Hi Ashish, hi Vatsa, how are you guys doing?
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Carrie.
Spending time on coup these days.
Well, we'll talk about that in further detail. So last week we had just the one episode on India-US relations, which was very interesting. I thought. I mean, especially given some of the things that happened afterwards, right? Ashish, you want to talk about the India-US relations, what we discussed, and some key highlights as well.
Yeah, this was a very interesting episode. I think different panelists had different views on how the Indo-US relationship will evolve in the Biden administration. Uh, I think the difference really is that the level of optimism differs. I mean, it's kind of different across different sections of analysts. Some people feel that the Indo-US relationship is not dependent on who the president in the US is, but it's more like a bipartisan effort to keep India on the right side. But I think personally, I'm quite worried about how things are evolving, especially in the uh, social sphere, right? Like the influence of the uh, uh, sociologists or the woke liberal population in the US that keeps increasing rapidly, and how would that pan out remains to be seen. So we had good points and counterpoints here. Sunanda Vashish, who lives in Houston and has been there for 20 years, has seen three different presidents. Abhishek Paul, who very closely follows the US politics, and I spoke about different viewpoints. Very interesting episode, I think, and I just hope I am wrong on this one as the next 4 years evolve.
Right, and the Modi-Biden call happened right after, right?
Yes, soon after. In fact, the points that we raised in the episode, that areas like climate change or a commitment to multilateral organizations and rule-based world order, etc., all of that actually found a resonance in the speech, or sorry, in the readout which both India and US put out after that call. So I think good validation of the thought process in that sense.
Right. So definitely check out this episode. I mean, we're seeing a lot of interest from outside of India in this episode, particularly. Right. Moving on to the first piece of news from the week that was, eminent personalities and top politicians have begun flocking to Koo, a homegrown social media app which is positioned as a Twitter rival. Twitter has been in hot water over the past few weeks, as we've seen. So it's no surprise that an Indian-made competitor is gaining popularity. Koo is a multimedia microblogging platform and has raised over $4 million in funding just the last week. It also won a government award for driving tech innovation. The app reported that downloads have gone up by over 10x in the past few days, with a spike of 10 to 20x growth in new users. Ashish, you're on Q, I know, and I know that Bharat Varta is on Koo. Are we witnessing the next Indian Twitter in the making?
Very interesting change, Carrie. I have actually used all the different platforms which have come in the last 4 5 years, and nothing really has stuck as much as Koo has, and that's only in the last week actually. The founders are the ones who were running Taxi for sure, so they had a very successful exit. Ola had bought their company for 200 million, I think in 2016. So these are people who are in the tech world, who understand what it takes to build a consumer product, which is a positive thing. The app, as you mentioned, has raised 4 million in funding, initial funding. I mean, of course, Twitter probably has had access to 1.5, 2 billion in funding, so long way to go in terms of comparison. But for the first time, I think there's a serious challenge being mounted. The app won the Atmanirbhar App Challenge in August 2020, and I think that must have been the time when government decided that we need to have an alternative to Twitter in India, because it appears that right now a lot of engagement is being driven by MyGov, and several ministers have also joined. They've all got what they call orange tick or yellow tick, which is the verified handle in Koo. And it seems that the handles have been reserved for various eminent personalities already, right? So you can't create handles in someone else's name, even if you wanted to as a parody, etc. So there's certainly a game plan here. How was it devised? When was it devised? We will come to know. But the intent seems to be that while Twitter obviously cannot be shut down in India, I mean, it is used for international diplomacy. There are a lot of foreign dignitaries, cricketers, lot of the other kind of celebrities which have got a global linkages around Twitter. So you cannot really shut it down per se, but it appears that the government is preparing to use a local platform for the day-to-day communication. And what happens then is that a lot of media will be forced to use tools because the government is going to release its news, etc., in a different platform. Then the media has to be there. And once that happens, that kind of propels the use. And I already see media organizations on to like News 18. So that start has been already been made. Someone mentioned on Twitter that India, there are 17.5 million users on Twitter from India. I would have thought that the numbers are a little higher than that, probably about 30 million. But nonetheless, who seems to have got 3 million users in the last week, which is like 1/10 or 1/6 of Twitter's India base, depending on what the actual Twitter numbers are. What is not there on Coup right now is essentially media and brands. And once that happens, things may change significantly. And it seems like it's getting there. So they seem to have a very good start, and the app seems to have stabilized in the last couple of days. The one point I would mention here is that Twitter has had 15-year run. Coup's like probably 8 months old or 6 months old. So the comparisons which will be there on feature list, etc., feature set, some of them are, I mean, there has to be some patience with Coup in that sense if people really want to use it, because Twitter got a long rope. And I remember that in 2009, 10, 11, when Twitter did not work properly, it actually used to be quite a event. Yeah, exactly. Fail whale and all of that. And so people used to enjoy Twitter's failures, right? But the new platform will be under pressure to be at the same level as Twitter, which is not practically possible. So I think once the glitches are sorted out, I mean, they probably will get 1 year to cover 10 years of Twitter. If they are able to do that, this seems like very promising journey in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually reminded of this quote, I mean, I don't know who said it. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build something new that makes the existing reality obsolete, right? Or redundant. And I think this whole Coup thing is sort of an initiative in that direction, I would say. And Aprimaya is an experienced founder and an investor as well. So he has seen consumer apps and he has seen scale. So I'm sure that, I mean, we won't be short of resources or expertise as such. So this is actually promising. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next piece of news. Unfortunately, a glacier broke in Uttarakhand, leaving 26 people dead and 170 missing. Current investigations indicate that this break was caused by an avalanche that broke the Rishiganga Dam. The glacier was situated off the Rainy village in the Tapovan area of Uttarakhand. Rescue attempts are underway, with teams working around the clock to evacuate workers stuck in tunnels. Food supplies are also being airdropped to affected villages. The debris of this avalanche has created an artificial lake thrice the size of a football field. Authorities are worried that this could lead to another flood. Pretty unfortunate, what's up?
Yeah, Carrie. I think with an incident like this, it's good you use the term initial investigation because people tend to jump to conclusions that, and we are seeing some of that kind of suit their own ideology in terms of whether there being, construction in the mountains and so on. At this stage, it does appear that this is more of a landslide, whereby part of a glacier broke off and fell with a rock for about 2,000 meters. So that's nearly 2 kilometers in height, and that that momentum and it combining with rocks and other material. And obviously all this force would have melted some of the ice, which led to a lot of destruction downstream. Now, one thing is that similar incident had happened in Nepal in 2012, and there was not a similar incident, but an incident which led to quite a few deaths in Kedarnath in 2013. And at that time, there were the NDMA came up with a list of things that should be done in terms of studies that should be carried out periodically And I think some of that should be enforced more stringently, because some of these incidents, if not all, are preventable if rocks, their movement, where the areas of strain and so on, these are monitored regularly. So I do hope that this is not seen as an act of God, or that we should not have development in the hills, or we should not build dams in the Himalayas and so on. But seen more as what can we do to prevent such incidents in the future through better use of technology and monitoring.
Right.
Gary, I'll just add one point here that the power plant which kind of got completely destroyed was actually a run of the river plant, right? And that is actually the type of plant which environmentalists typically approve of. What they don't want is like the impounding type dams which are large size and essentially displace a lot of people and change environmental realities. On the contrary to that, the run of the river projects do not have that much of an environmental impact. So as such, this is not a classic dam burst type of a thing, which we should lead people to criticize these large projects. And it wasn't that. But I think people just don't see the actual data and or facts, and then basically opine based on their own biases. So as Vatsa rightly said, until the full investigations are done, we shouldn't really blame this on large projects and so on. There's a lot which we don't know right now on what exactly transpired.
Yeah, I mean the dam itself, the power plant is just about 520 megawatts, so it wouldn't even qualify as something very large.
Right. All right, moving on. The Ram Mandir Trust has raised over 1,000 crores for the temple in just under a month. The secretary for the Sri Ram Janmabhoomi Tirtha Kshetra stated that 1.5 lakh Vishwa Hindu Parishad volunteers are collecting funds from remote villages and elsewhere. President Ramnath Kovind has donated 5 lakhs in his personal capacity, with Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan ji donating 1 lakh for the cause. The total cost for building the complex was estimated to be around 1,100 crores, with about 300 to 400 crores for the temple alone. Ashish, surprised to see such an amazing response in such a short time?
Yeah, great response to the whole donation drive here. The temple is being constructed from private enterprise, from private money. There's no government money involved here. So it was incumbent on people to contribute. In fact, if you remember, this point had come up in our podcast, which released just on the day of the Bhumi Pujan, right? Like when Vivek Kitan and Rohit Jaraman spoke about how the Ayodhya movement had shaped up. They had highlighted in a big way the role of individuals beyond institutions. How individuals have really stood up and led this movement. I think the same comes out here in terms of the collections for the actual construction. The project is estimated to cost around 1,100 crores. So I'm guessing that the trust would want to collect about 1,500 to 2,000 crores, because that would then leave some margin for other projects and so on.
Right.
So there's still some way to go to get there. But nonetheless, I think it seems that at the current pace, 1,500 crores should be easy to collect. The last day for the current cycle of donations was end of Feb. So we still have a few days to go, like half a month to go, and that should essentially take the number closer to 1,500, hopefully. And I think we can't wait to really see the construction start and get into full swing. I mean, this has been a project. This has been like a movement which has lasted. All of at least my adult lifetime. And most of us actually did not think that this project will actually materialize in front of our eyes. So now that it is happening, it would be good to see it completed in the next 3-4 years as it is planned.
Yeah, definitely. So, the Minister for Road Transport and Highways, Shri Nitin Gadkari, launched India's first CNG tractor. It is a diesel converted CNG tractor and is currently an experimental pilot project. The tractor can reportedly help save farmers over 1 lakh annually on fuel costs. Shri Gadkari stated that it would be economically friendly as it has the lowest content of carbon and other pollutants. He also claimed that it will have a better mileage than other diesel vehicles. The tractor has already obtained all required approvals before the launch. What's up? Your thoughts on how this could impact farming and agriculture?
So I think this is a great bit of news that has come in the last couple of days. So Mr. Gadkari himself was involved in kind of getting the prototype built. This was built in partnership with an Italian company. Uh, the thing is, there are few things that will happen as a result of this. First is that as you mentioned, it is expected that farmers will save up to about a lakh and a half just on fuel every year. That in itself is a big amount, for farmers. So apart from that, it can also solve some of the problems related to stubble burning, because that in itself can act as an input to generating fuel for these kind of tractors. So it'll be a net win-win in that sense, that a lot of stubble that is burned, whether it's rice or wheat or whatever crop, it can directly be converted into biofuel. So it will obviously also help some states like Delhi, which suffer due to stubble burning. Every year, about 35 million tons of stubble is burnt in India. The other thing is, because it doesn't have sulfur, carbon, etc., it should result in lower maintenance cost. We've kind of seen that with the autos, that run on CNG, they report lower running cost. Uh, then I think they're also talking about having some of these retrofitting done on older diesel vehicles, and to try and see if tax rebates can be given for setting up some of these centers and people who buy such retrofitted vehicles or for retrofitting. Uh, so overall, I think the impact will be multifold. Another thing that I missed mentioning is this will also help in kind of ethanol blend industry, right? The ethanol blending industry, which is currently at about 20,000 crores. Uh, so that is expected to go up tenfold in the coming years. So that will be another benefit, because that can be then used, as fuel. So overall, it looks very promising. It's a space to watch out for, uh, and I do hope that the promise is realized, because what it will mean is that it will mean us depending less on import of fossil fuel, lesser pollution, and so on.
Yeah.
I just had one point here on the whole CNG economy, right? So we have discussed in one of the previous weeklies on the GAIL project between Bangalore and Kerala going live. But I think what is happening is that this government has focused on a concept of city gas distribution, or CGD, right? What is happening is, the idea is here is that a lot of domestic as well as industrial, or at least MSME type consumption of fuel moves to gas, and we are laying gas grids across the country. Obviously, the eastern side is richer compared to the western one, although Gujarat has got a very good city gas coverage. But there are pipelines now being laid around the country, which will bring easy access to both natural gas as well as PNG as well as CNG to households and to industries. And this project is called Urja Ganga, which is led by the Petroleum Ministry, which is under Mr. Pradhan. And this is a very promising project, because this creates jobs. I mean, as Vatsa said, there's a fossil fuel angle, but it also creates jobs, permanent jobs, with new skill sets around laying and maintaining the pipelines and so on. And several companies like Mahanagar Gas, GAIL, Indraprastha Gas, Adani Gas, a lot of those companies are involved in these projects. So I think it's a space to watch out for. Somehow it's not being talked about as much. I mean, I actually personally feel it's a great transformational program for India. It hasn't really been covered as much in the media, but very interesting development. And I think as more product side innovation happens, like the tractors, for example, that would also spur the investments on the supply, because if there's a market out there, then obviously companies would want to tap it. and some regulatory changes also happening around creating a shared infrastructure and so on. So good stuff. I think something to watch out for in the next 5 to 10 years.
All right, moving on. The Supreme Court issued a notice to Twitter on the need to establish a mechanism to check fake news. BJP leader Vinit Goenka filed a public interest litigation in which he remarked that there are hundreds of fake Twitter handles and bogus Facebook accounts. These were registered in the name of eminent citizens and high dignitaries, he stated. The Supreme Court then issued a notice to the Centre and Twitter India to seek responses which will check Twitter content and advertisements. The petition by Goenka also mentioned that political parties use fake social media accounts for self-promotion and image building. It also suggested a law as per which actions can be taken against Twitter in India for promoting anti-India tweets. Ashish, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, looks like we are discussing this very regularly because there is no conclusion to this saga. See, social media cannot be regulated the way content industries are regulated, right? You cannot have a censor board which will look into the side of tweeting. So, I mean, I can't send a tweet for an approval to a censor board which will then say that you can go ahead or you cannot go ahead. Right? So, essentially, the censorship has to happen or the control has to happen post facto. And that is where Twitter, at least, I mean, Facebook has somehow kind of coped up with it, but Twitter definitely seems to be in a bad place because they don't seem to be actually doing the post policing very well. And when they do it, they kind of crouch it in a supranational framework of their terms and conditions, etc., which doesn't really map to the individual states' sovereign rules. So this showdown was inevitable. I mean, we've spoken about this. Someone had to take it up. It has just been incumbent on India. Just like we banned 59 Chinese apps and followed it up with another 120 apps. I think the same situation has arisen for us, where India is now responsible to kind of lead that's the action against Twitter globally, right? And what we do will be keenly watched because we are the third largest market for Twitter after US and Japan. I mean, in terms of the number of users. So as such, I think the issue, while the PIL talks about a lot of things, in my mind, the real issue is that can Twitter rules supersede Indian law, right? Basically, that is the question. I mean, if laws have been enacted by Parliament, and they've also held the scrutiny of Supreme Court, like in the case of 69A, can Twitter refuse to implement those laws? I mean, the law itself has got a recourse that you can go to the Supreme Court or the competent courts to appeal against the government decision. But they cannot say that we decided because our policy teams thought that this doesn't apply to us.
Precisely.
That, to my mind, is where the gap is. Everything else, I mean, fake news, etc. I don't think there is a really good mechanism to counter that, right? Given the speed and the volume of how these things happen. Twitter can only act post facto. It can only act with some lag, and of course that bias around banning one type of quote unquote free speech will be there in terms of calling it obnoxious, while the other type of quote unquote free speech will be allowed because it is free. So I think I don't think there's a great solution to that. But I think just in terms of government rules not being followed, that's something which is untenable. And in some ways, the picture on the screen summarizes that. I mean, that, like, if you see when Jack met PM Modi, typically there's a protocol of how you sit with the head of a state, right? And Jack doesn't like Indian protocols. So the picture is a great metaphor for what's happening in India right now. And I think with coup, etc., coming in and the government trying to diversify its sources of communication with people, some of this it may come to a pass where government may take some strong steps, or basically just try to make Twitter redundant. I mean, even that could be a battle via a coup. So let's see how it evolves. But I just hope that the courts do intervene on this one particular point, that Twitter will have to abide by the government directives, and if it doesn't like it, they can go to the court and appeal against it.
Yeah. No, I mean,
or they can build a new India, as someone said on Twitter.
Yeah, or they can sell Twitter India to someone, get them listed here. I mean, there are other options also, but I mean, of course, those are extreme options.
Yeah. No, the fact that Twitter has become some sort of a supranational entity is worrying, right? Like a modern United Nations that is, arbitrating free speech policy, etc. And the fact that they have stated positions on actual governments elected by people, right, is actually worrisome. And worrisome from irrespective of what side of the political aisle you belong to, right? We've said this before that they should have been proactive about regulation, but instead, I think by picking sides very clearly, they have forced upon themselves to be regulated in this fashion. And I think, like, forget about the Supreme Court orders and whatnot. I think you're going to see a lot of government action as well, right? And staffing their teams with woke activists and people of a certain political persuasion very clearly may have been a mistake on hindsight, and they're going to see the consequence of this, right? Yeah, I think every time we discuss this, I feel like there's a lot more we can say, right?
We do get more views on Wiki whenever we discuss Twitter. That is what my empirical observation is.
All right, moving on. In fantastic news and development, ISRO has opened up their facilities to the private sector for the first time in 50 years. 2 satellites from the private sector and 1 from the academia were tested at the UR Rao Satellite Center in Bangalore. The companies that developed the satellites are Space Kids India and Syzygy Space Technologies. ISRO has given the go-ahead for 2 more companies, namely Skyroot Aerospace and Agnikul Cosmos, to test their engines at Sriharikota and Thiruvananthapuram. ISRO is also in talks for collaboration with companies like MapMy India, AWS, OneWeb, and many more. The space research body has received 26 proposals in total. Vatsa, this is fantastic news.
Absolutely. So I mean, we had a lot of people who were skeptical about the whole of Atmanirbhar Bharat and so on. So this was announced by the finance minister in June 2020. So it's just been about 8 months now, less than 8 months, where they talked about opening up, the space sector and creation of both InSpace and New Space India Limited. To sort of the latter for launching private satellites, and the former for collaborating more effectively with private companies. So now, if you were to look at the kind of value chain of ISRO, so there is obviously the manufacturing of launchers for space missions and satellites. Then there is monitoring, the commercial activities, and so on. And while this current bit of news is about the launch of satellites, the downstream, which is the applications of the data that comes through satellites, or applications that can be built to work with some of the information that comes through satellites, or for tracking the satellites, and so on, is what I am most excited about. I think this is the one space where we will see a lot of startups. And you've spoken about MapMy India, right, which has now mapped all of India. And in fact, we're possibly in a situation where we can say goodbye to some of the standard map applications that are used globally, and probably default to MapMy India. So while I'm excited about the launch of satellites, but the amount of data that comes out through the satellites, be it weather, be it the use case that we spoke about earlier, where there was a landslide. I'm sure there would have been, if this was mapped, say, through a satellite and monitored regularly, there could possibly have been a hint that this kind of event could occur, right? So there is a lot of civilian, military, and preventive kind of applications to the data that comes out of satellites as well. And I think that is one space where Indian startups will do very well going ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that brings us to the end of the news and events that we had to discuss this week. Coming up, we have a couple of really exciting episodes. We have one episode which is going to be a follow-up to India and the Foreign Press with Ruchir Sharma and Vishal Ganeshan. This was, this was one of the most popular episodes that we put out in the last couple of months. A lot of activity, a lot of interest around this, and considering what has transpired afterwards, I think there's plenty to discuss. I am personally very, very excited about this. We also have the second in our Long India series, and we're going to be talking to Ms. Radhika Gupta, who's the MD and CEO of Edelweiss Mutual Funds. Again, very inspirational lady. and a high achiever as well. Definitely a role model for people to emulate. And evidently is very, very bullish about India. Ashish, what are you guys looking forward to?
I'm definitely looking forward to the Radhika Gupta episode. I think, as you mentioned, she's quite an inspiration in terms of what she's achieved and so on.
Yeah, I think even the media influence one, Carrie, the earlier episode which we did with Ruchir and Vishal, that did very well in terms of the response, right? And a lot of people actually went through it in entirety. The episode was quite. It was not just rich in content, but also timing was very critical. We are facing those issues, what we discussed.
Yeah.
I think that's only going to increase with all the battle with social media giants and the tech firms not being very friendly to India. So I think looking forward to that one as well. Of course, Radhika's episode, as Vatsa said, will also be a great one. But I think so yeah. I mean, interesting lineup for the next week.
Right. All right, thank you guys so much for the love and support. We continue to receive some fantastic comments, and we're happy to bring you all of this content. And what's Ashish, your favorite comments from the week that was?
The one about Preeti's episode was nice. The fact that people can start getting more confident and more optimistic about India based on what we are doing. I think that's a great. That kind of embodies the purpose with which we started Bharat Vata, right? So to kind of
absolutely
bring out Indian stories and the Indian potential and so on. So I think that's like a mission accomplished kind of a feeling there.
Yeah, I also liked Sudhir's comment. He was there on the episode we did on Hyderabad, and what it kind of embodies what we want to do, which is cut the clutter, focus on facts, and try and make things easy to understand for people.
All right, guys. So that's a wrap from us here. Thank you so much for again choosing to skip the news and watch the weekly. This is a weekly edition, and we'll bring these news and views to you every Sunday, 10:30 a.m. India time. So look forward to meeting you guys on another episode. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.